space. I'm your host, Sarah Hoffman, and on today's call, we have Brian Briscoe of Streamline
Mhm.
Capital Group. So, Brian, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks, Sierra. Appreciate your time today.
Awesome. So, as usual, I always like to
Mhm.
start off by knowing more about your story. So, tell us
Okay.
what you did before and how did you get into commercial real estate?
Yeah. So what I did before, I was active duty Marine. So joined the military, um, got into the reserves while I was in college, and I went active duty right after September 11th. And so
Wow.
I ended up spending 20 years and a couple of days on active duty. And along the way, I started buying single family homes. And for the most part, my MO was I would move very frequently, try to buy a house wherever I moved, and then when I moved
Mm-hmm.
away, turn it into a rental. So that was the goal. And quite honestly, we did it 3 times. I wish we would have done it a lot more, but
Mm-hmm.
ended up doing it 3 times. And I got to the point to where I could see a lot of appreciation on some of the houses. That it was really building up over the years. Some years more than others, but saw the appreciation. There's some cash coming off of the properties, and I realized that, man, I've got the winning ticket here, and I had to figure out how to scale it. And I realized that, you know, at the end of my whenever my active duty career was going to end, I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do something in real estate. So
Mm-hmm.
um, started studying and landed upon multifamily and decided that this is how I want to do it. It's got all the aspects of residential real estate that I like, and you can scale a lot faster. So instead of you buying 100 single family houses, you buy 100 unit apartment complex,
Mm-hmm.
and you get roughly the same thing. So that's why I got into it. And it was something that I always wanted to do, but it was also kind of my way to get out of my off ramp from my active duty career.
Got it.
Yeah.
So, did you get into multifamily while you were active duty, or was that afterwards?
While I was still active duty, yeah,
Okay.
I had about 3 years before my 20-year mark, and most people probably understand. I mean, the military, you can retire at your 20-year mark,
Mm-hmm.
and the day before you hit 20, you can't. So it's kind of that light switch at 20 years.
Yeah.
um, I think it's archaic, but that's just how it is.
Mm-hmm.
But I started when I was around my 17-year mark, and I essentially burned the ships, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I am going to retire the first day I'm eligible. And the second thing that I made up my mind on is that I would not seek another job. I would never look for another job. And
Mm-hmm.
so, with those two things in mind, it was like multifamily or nothing, or my kids go hungry type stuff. So yeah, I burned the boats. You refuse to talk about anything besides making multifamily my career.
Mm-hmm.
And to go along with that, I got into a coaching program, which I think coaching programs really help accelerate your success.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, found a couple of partners. We did a bunch of properties together. Um, I left that partnership shortly after I retired, and now I'm doing everything, basically, doing the same thing just with different people.
Got it. All
Yeah.
right. So you had a mentorship. A lot of people
Mhm.
usually start off that way. So most of our
Yeah.
guests do the same thing.
Mhm.
So obviously that really helped and got you to where you are today. So what year was that when you first got into multifamily?
It depends on when you hit the stopwatch, I guess. I
Mm-hmm.
joined the mentorship program in 2018, closed on our first property in 2019, and we're actually selling that one, which might close tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah, I still have to, get down to the, get a couple of documents notarized and FedExed, for that to happen. But yeah, we should close on that tomorrow. It might be the day after, but that was the first property we bought, and
Mm-hmm.
3 years later, 3.5 years later, it's now on the chopping block to sell.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So is that the first one you're selling?
No, it's going to be the fifth and sixth. And when I say the first one, we bought two properties that were fairly close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as one, it was the same seller, and he had them both on the same loan, so we had to sell them together. So yeah, our first deal was actually two properties, and we're actually selling those both together as well to a different buyer who's buying both at the same time.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that must be nice to kind of go full circle on that. And obviously, you've been in this business now for
Mhm.
about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
So where does your portfolio look like today?
So I've been in part of 1,100 units. We've sold, so that's a total of 12 different properties. We've now sold five, and we've got the two more that should sell tomorrow. So I think last year was a really good year to sell. We did
Hmm.
sell a lot. So right now the portfolio, I still have two properties in Georgia, one in South Carolina. After these two sell, they were in South Carolina, one in Texas, one in Ohio. So that's what the portfolio looks like right now. I'm working with a couple other partnerships where we have, a deal under contract in Houston as of earlier today, and a deal under contract in Denver that should close in about a month. And those are on the buy side. So still a buyer. I don't think that's ever going to change. So still buying
Hmm.
properties and doing everything I can to keep buying.
Great. So out there actively buying properties. Looks like you're pretty busy. I know you're doing a lot of different things education wise. So, and we actually met because you have your own podcast, and it's
Absolutely.
funny that I recorded a podcast with you yesterday, and here we are today recording on my podcast. So, can you
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about just those different aspects of your business, how they all tie in to what you're doing?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So, when I started doing this, when I started, buying properties, and that first property I talked about, I was the guy, leading the troop, so to speak. I found the property, spearheaded the due diligence. Just realized I'm using a lot of military terms, but that's just part of me now. Um, but yeah, I basically pushed that over the finish line to get it closed, and ended up doing asset management once we closed. But what I started realizing is, my role was finding properties, and
Hmm.
I enjoyed talking to people about how to do it more than I enjoyed the actual finding the properties part. And so, um, just because of where I was working at the Pentagon at the time. Because of where I was working, I didn't have, broker hours available. And
Mm.
so I handed over the acquisition reins to one of my partners, and my main role was capital raising and building like educational products. But once again, I enjoyed talking to people who wanted to do what we were doing more than the other aspects of the business. Not that I
Hmm.
don't enjoy that, but so that's what started the podcast. It's got a unique format. I haven't seen anybody else try to do it. So it works extremely well. We bring on an experienced investor and an aspiring investor on every episode, and
Hmm.
that was designed, as part of this whole educational experience that I wanted to provide. Have experts teaching the people who are up and coming.
Hmm.
And I started writing down a lot of things. Just every time somebody would ask me a question, I'd try to ad lib on the phone or on Zoom or whatever and answer their question. But when they were done, I'm like, man, I really should have answered like this, and I would type it up. But long story short, after months and months of doing these things, I started compiling everything, and that ended up being what is now the Tribe of Titans. It's a
Hmm.
multifamily education group. We've
Hmm.
got a lot of content. We've got over 200 people involved in it right now who are part of that community. And it's growing. It's growing quickly. So,
Hmm.
it's something that I love doing. I love helping people get to where they can buy big apartment complexes. And so yeah, so I have the multifamily educational community. There is a subscription fee to be in there, but got a lot of educational content, networking opportunities. We do webinars and whatnot. And I am actually launching a coaching program as well, that
Nice.
will be integrated with the Tribe of Titans. The coaching students are going to get a lot more direct access to me, but that's something that you'll be hearing about very shortly in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. Well, that's good to
Yeah.
hear. I know that, there's a lot of people that definitely need help, more one-on-one help, I would say, getting
Mm,
into this multifamily space. So it's nice to
yeah.
have that access to you because you have built, a pretty big business for yourself in a
Mhm.
short amount of time. Looks like you have over $100 million in assets under management.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, and that's the cumulative.
hmm
Right now, if you were to add everything up, we're probably just below 100, just because we've sold off a lot of the properties. But
hmm
um, it's close, and the numbers change every day.
yeah, of
So
course.
yeah, so that's where we're at. So that's that. The podcast, like I said, was part of that educational thing, and then of course acquisitions and finding new properties
hmm
to acquire. My new focus is Salt Lake City. Looking to hire. I've got a couple of candidates that I'm really excited about. Looking to hire an acquisitions guy in Salt Lake and build a
Oh,
team in
nice.
Salt Lake City. Yeah,
Great.
that's going to be a lot of fun.
So what is it about the Salt Lake City market that you like, and why are
Yeah.
you specifically focusing on that area?
Yeah, I was born and raised in that area, so I know it very well. My family lives there. I got two daughters in their 20s. I know I don't look like that old, but yeah, I got two daughters in their 20s, and they both live in Salt Lake City. It's a market that's been growing extremely fast. There's
hmm
a lot of growth still there. The state is business friendly, so a lot of
hmm
businesses are moving there. A lot of tech companies are moving there, and
hmm
so it's almost like the new Austin, up in the mountains
Yeah.
because of all the tech
hmm
that's moving there right now. So
Yeah.
yeah, between the landlord friendly state, the business friendly state, the tech friendly state with a lot of startups and companies moving there. Also have the benefit of the outward migration from California.
hmm
People moving there as well. There's a lot of growth. So my real answer is what's not to like about living there. And my favorite college football team, University of
Nice.
Utah, is also in Salt Lake City.
Nice.
So
Well, the
yeah.
reason why I ask is because a lot of people say that Salt Lake City is very competitive right now.
Mhm.
Cap rates are compressed there. So,
Yep.
what are
True.
your thoughts on that?
All true. Yeah. And the reason it's competitive there is because of all those things I mentioned, and so, yeah, cap rates are compressed. Yeah, you're going to pay a little more per unit,
hmm
but what that means is there's lower perceived risk in the market, and the other thing is, and this is a benefit of low cap rates. When you do your value add, all
hmm
right. If you add $1 to your NOI, you're dividing it by your cap rate. And if you have a lower cap rate, that's a higher multiple on
hmm
how much equity you produce or how much value you actually add to the property. So
hmm
there's a lot more value add potential in
Yeah,
markets with low cap rates than there are in markets with high cap rates.
got it.
Yeah.
And so tell me a little bit about your investment strategy going into these. Are you looking at newer properties like Class A, or are you looking to, maybe like Class B property that you maybe do a little bit of work, some value add, like you said?
Yeah, so starting out, it is a very competitive market, and there's a big sale announced last week, and a 150 unit apartment was bought by a pension fund, and
hmm
so institutional investors are in there buying these 150 unit assets, and so we're not going to be able to compete immediately in the spaces that I'd like to be in. So
hmm
we're just going to take a measured approach there. Come
hmm
in, get something that 50 to 100 units is going to be our starting point. B
Okay.
class asset, value add, and for the first deal or two, I don't want to spend a lot of time in C class, but for the first deal or two, just to break into the market,
hmm
C class value add. But look, 5 to 10 years from now, I want about 60% of my portfolio to be
hmm
core plus, the B class, and we can buy it as a value add, but I want to do the long term holds
Yeah.
and take that value add property, turn it into a core plus asset, where it's low risk. It's going to be an ATM machine for investors. So I want about 60% of our assets to be in that,
hmm
20% in like the A class core area,
hmm
and another 20% in the value add space. So what I really want to focus on is B class value add and then turning those into long-term holds.
Got it. And so
Yeah.
do you focus entirely on syndication, or do you also have joint ventures that you've done as well?
Yeah, I've done joint ventures. I've done syndications. The new venture in Salt Lake City is going to be a syndication based company,
Hmm.
um, and I still will do joint ventures on the side. I've been KP on several deals, so I'm willing to, part of me enjoying helping other people out. When new people, newer investors, newer people in the space need to get a loan and help qualify for a loan, I can come in and help do that. So I've done that a couple times as well.
Hmm.
But the Salt Lake strategy is primarily going to be syndication based, and I don't see anything changing that in the near future.
Got it. So what would you have to say about maybe the pros and cons of going into joint venture versus a syndication?
Joint venture, you have a smaller amount of people, and you're limited to the cash that the joint venture partners have in their back pockets or in their checking account, right? So
Hmm.
depending on your partners and depending on what you want to do, but typically, if you got a couple of partners with deep pockets, you might be able to carve yourself out a pretty good role in the joint venture market space. Or if you've got a lot of money in your back pocket, you can carve out a pretty good role in that joint venture space. But eventually, I think if people want to scale and they want to get big, it's a little harder in that joint venture space because once again, you're limited to the cash you have between the joint venture ship. With syndications, I mean, you can still have a small team that's operating the property, but now you have access to a lot of other people's money, and
Hmm.
you can bring. There's no limit to how many investors you can bring into your syndication. So you can bring in hundreds of investors, or still just a couple with larger check sizes. So I think syndication you can typically get into bigger properties faster than with joint ventures.
All right. Well, what I'd like to get into now is actually walk through, one of the deals that you've gone through,
Mhm.
maybe your first one, maybe one that was particularly difficult.
Mhm.
I got this from you on your podcast yesterday, and I really like
Yeah.
that format. So can you tell me about one of the deals you have?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this one that's selling, and it's not the home run great story that a lot of people talk about. We bought it in October of 2019, and prior to closing, we thought we were going to get like a rate in the threes, and what was happening at the time was Fannie and Freddie, you have federally mandated caps that they can't exceed. If you're looking at where interest rates were, we began 2019, and most of your agency products were around 5%, and they had been for several years. They're about where they're at right now, to be honest with you. But
Yeah.
in early 2019, the Fed started cutting the federal funds rate, and by the end of 2019, it was a lot lower. And so rates in general went from mid fives to mid threes. And so you had a wave of refinances. Everybody
Hmm.
who held on had properties were just like, man, I have a 5%. I'm going to get that 3% locked in. And so
Hmm.
Fannie and Freddie were both against their federally mandated caps. We were getting two Fannies on two different properties. And essentially, what they did to slow down lending is they just added, a full percentage point to what the market, had in store. So Freddie and Fannie both had to slow down to stay under their caps. And so basically what happened to us on this property is, we thought we were going to get like a 3.8% interest rate. And, all of a sudden our interest rate was at 5.1, it
Oh,
was like,
wow.
oh my gosh. And that affected everything.
Yeah.
What it really did was it affected how our proceeds. So
Yeah.
instead of getting about 75%, we were actually going to be closer to 80% loan to value on this loan, which would have been great. We ended up coming in at about 65% loan to value, and we
Mm-hmm.
almost dropped out of this deal. But what we ended up doing to stay in and keep our investors in was we changed our splits. So we had a six pref, and I think we had like a 70-30 split is what we
Hmm.
had forecasted. But we contacted all of our investors and said, hey, here's the deal. Here's the new projections. In order for us to make this work, we're going to do a 90-10 split. And so we basically gave our investors almost 100% of the proceeds. They're getting the six pref plus 90% of everything left over just to keep the deal alive. And things were going great.
Mm-hmm.
5 months after we closed, however, we had COVID, and
Oh,
you know
yeah.
this was a value add play, and so we intentionally had a handful of vacant units because we wanted to have a bunch of renovated units ready
Mm-hmm.
in May, which is the best time to lease. Historically, especially in this community,
Mm-hmm.
May and August were the best times to lease for the highest prices. So we wanted to have a bunch of units ready to go in May. And so we were at like 85% occupancy when everything shut down, and, leasing went to a standstill. Anyway, we struggled. It took us about 6 months to get back up to full occupancy. And we struggled on that property. Had to cut into our reserves at some point, and we ended up not distributing capital to investors for, I think, 3 quarters in a row. But once we got back on track, we were still cash flowing, still pushing out money, and now we're selling it, and we're gonna be shy of what we projected to our investors, but not by much. We're not going to be that far short of what we projected. But yeah, that ended up being a big learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
Had I a time machine to go back in time, I might have actually passed on that deal. But
Mm-hmm.
um, well, the way we handled it, I think, has really kept a lot of investors with us. I was at an event 2 weeks ago, and one of my investors was there.
Mm-hmm.
And something that we did, like I said, we haven't quite met the investors' returns, but I didn't earn a penny on that. So
Mm-hmm.
when we start looking at all the returns, yeah, we could have taken our 10%, but we didn't even take our 10%.
I
Number
see.
one, and number two, I've got over $100,000 in that deal. I didn't even take, none of the general partners in the deal took distributions at all to make sure that everything was
Mm-hmm.
funneled towards the investor. So, but yeah, one of the investors in the deal, we were talking to him, and it was me and somebody else, and he kind of poked me in the ribs a little bit for not hitting the returns that we projected. But then he said, "But I know these guys didn't make any money off of it, and I would still invest with them again." So it's not really the returns that matter all the time, but I
Mm-hmm.
think business, the relationships matter, and the
Yeah.
fact that I made nothing on that deal, and my investors came close to the projected
Mm-hmm.
returns. I think that's the right way to do business.
Now, was that your first deal?
That was our first deal. Fortunately, all of our other deals have done a lot better. But yeah, that was our first deal, and we've sold four already.
Mm-hmm.
I get confused every once in a while, but we've
Yeah.
sold four already, and those have all hit the projected returns. Besides the one that's selling, tomorrow or the next day, we've got another one
Mm-hmm.
under contract, and if that goes through, we're exceeding investor returns. So, yeah, out of everything we own, this is the one that didn't quite hit the mark.
Yeah, well, they say the first deal is the hardest to get. You said you started your mentorship in 2018, and then you
Mhm.
bought this in October of 2019. So
Yep.
how long was it? Like over a year before you got your first deal?
It was less than a year. I mean, it was right around Thanksgiving. I think it was just after Thanksgiving that I officially started the mentoring program,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was just under a year that we closed it. We ended up having to take a couple extensions on this deal to get it closed. But yeah, we were under contract for a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
it probably took about 6 months to get it under contract and another 5 months to close.
Wow.
But
Yeah, that's
yeah,
a long time.
it was way too long, and I,
Yeah.
I know the brokers were getting antsy, the seller was getting antsy, but I mean, what ended up happening is, we sent our LOI in with our timeline, and the seller was the first. After we signed the LOI, the seller was the first person to send out a draft of the contract, and the seller's attorneys accidentally put everything in business days. And so
Mm.
instead of having 30 business days or 30 calendar days for due diligence, we had 30 business days. And then we had
Oh, wow.
60 days to close. And then we had
Yeah.
a 30-day extension. But, um, our attorney pointed this out to us and said, just don't mention it. See if it slides.
Yeah.
They're the
Yeah.
ones that put it out, and we're not going to call it out. We're not going to redline it.
Mm-hmm.
And Sure enough, the seller didn't notice it until after the fact. It was after the contract
Hmm.
was signed that, the broker sent out the timeline, and my response was, hold on a second, contract says business days. And so,
Uh-huh.
so we had a lot more time to close than we needed. And since it
Yeah.
was our first deal, and I wish I could go back and undo this, since it was our first deal, every time we come to something that we didn't know or we needed help on, our response was, we got plenty of time. Let's just slow
Mm.
down. I'm going to go ask my mentor. We had a couple different people in different mentoring programs in this group. You
Hmm.
go ask your
Hmm.
mentor. We'll come back to the table in a couple of days and we'll discuss it.
Yeah.
And so we weren't in a hurry to close. And I think that was a
Got it.
big, big mistake on that
Yeah.
property. But yeah,
Right. Yeah. Because if you closed
yeah.
earlier, then you wouldn't have a problem with those interest rates.
No, we wouldn't have had a problem with the interest rates. We probably would have had a lot more units renovated. And I mean, closing in October, when you look at the leasing patterns in a lot of areas,
Hmm.
April, May, June are the heaviest leasing months. And, typically one half to two-thirds of your leases are signed in those 3 months.
Hmm.
And, October to February are the dead leasing months. So we took over a value add project in October and we had nothing to add value to because it was 100% occupied, and so we're just like, okay, let's wait till February till somebody moves out, and I think we had
Yeah.
3 move outs in February, 4 move outs in February. I don't remember the exact numbers, maybe one in January, but
Hmm.
yeah, had we hurried and had we closed in like
Hmm.
July, we
Right.
would have been able to renovate a lot more units. We wouldn't have had the interest rate hike that we did. We probably
Hmm.
would have locked in at a 3.8. We would have gotten more proceeds. Um, and I mean, I think everything would have gone a lot better. We would have had a lot more units renovated.
Hmm.
Um, but I think the whole project would have gone better. Our debt service would have been a lot lower. So we would have been able to pay out more to the investors, and we probably would have hit our mark. We probably would have exceeded our mark, even with the pref and the 75-25
Yeah.
split. But yeah, I mean,
Well, the
yeah,
good news is that you got your first deal done. They say that once you have that, the second and third are shortly, right after that. So did you
yeah,
find that as soon as that closed, everything else kind of fall into place a little bit easier, the second and third
yeah.
deal?
I mean, brokers looked at us differently. Brokers now looked at us as closers, and all of a sudden, the brokers were showing us deals.
Hmm.
As soon as we closed on that deal, I sent the announcement to like a bunch of brokers that had previously not
Mm.
given me the time of day. And all of a
Okay.
sudden, these brokers were sending me properties. All of a sudden, these
Hmm.
brokers were returning my calls. They were texting, they were calling, they were
Yeah.
emailing, and it was just like, okay, so
That's smart.
it
Yeah.
was it was the yeah, it's now we were closers, we had credibility, and the brokers, we were no longer a risk to the brokers. We weren't going to waste their time, kicking tires and touring properties. We were closers.
Hmm. Now, did you send them like a personal one-on-one email, or was it kind of like a MailChimp or some kind of email blast to?
Personal.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah. It
personal.
was.
Yeah.
I remember one of them was like one of them I had actually sat down and met, and he never returned any of my calls or emails after we met, and I
Mm.
figured, I must not have impressed him. But the next deal we closed was from that broker. But the email I sent to him was, "Hey, if you remember, we met in March." And I think I was a little snotty with it. I was like, you probably didn't return my calls because you thought I wasn't a closer, but we raised $2 million for this property. We just closed on this one. You're probably aware of it. Love to do business with you. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden he was sending me emails and texts. And yeah, the next one we closed on was from that broker. And another broker that had flat out told me, come to me when you own something. We did. It was what he told us from the very beginning is, I work with owners, not wannabe owners.
Oh,
you know
wow.
and
Wow.
I'm glad he said that, because that was the first time that it kind of dawned on me the game that the brokers play.
Hmm.
So anyway, yeah, so we went back to him, and we've bought several properties through him as well. But yeah, it makes a big difference that you've closed on something in this industry.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for being on the show today, for sharing all your information and wisdom.
Yeah.
Where's the best place for people to find you if they want to learn more about you and your coaching programs?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me. I post there very frequently. Send me a connection request, send me a DM. Our educational community is called the Tribe of Titans, and the coaching program is going to be an extension of that. Website's thetribeoftitans.info, and the other company website, streamlinecapitalgroup.com. But if people are interested in the education part, reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we'll set up a call.
Perfect. All right. I'll make sure to include all those links below in the show notes. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you guys enjoyed today's show, please write us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every review helps us to reach more and more people that are looking to get involved in commercial real estate. Today's show was sponsored by Synergy Capital Investments. To download your free multifamily investment guide for beginners, or to schedule a call to learn about our upcoming investment projects, go to thrivewithsynergy.com. That's thrivewithsynergy.com, or click on the link below.